talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave, and this week, it's the Hollywood Studios Year by Year 1934 RKO. We're going to be talking about a pair of Katharine Hepburn vehicles this week.
But first, I think Dave has something he wants to tell us.
I thought we would kick things off with a few facts and figures relevant to the Katharine Hepburn story, which is oft rehearsed. You get this rise and fall narrative for Hepburn during the 1930s. She comes on like gangbusters, Selznick signs her, she has a few immediate successes.
She's also considered one of the great actresses right away of the screen.
And then immediately becomes more and more of a problem for her studio until she is box office poison just a few years later and has to go away and remake herself on Broadway in the Philadelphia
It certainly
story.
seems like Katharine Hepburn herself accepted this narrative.
Yeah, but it does not seem to be borne out by the numbers I found. I wanted to look at this particularly because it's relevant to where she stands in 1934 and how the studio would have perceived her when they were making these two films. The standard narrative, and you get this even from Kendall, and that's why, again, it's fresh in my mind. The Elizabeth Kendall approach to Hepburn's story is basically the same with a couple of little grace notes in there that help her and become chapters in her book. When you look at all of the Hepburn RKOs, the narrative is that pretty much all of them lost money except for the special ones after the initial burst of interest in this weird new New Englander. But if you look at it, the only two movies that lost money are Sylvia Scarlett, which did lose $200,000, which is really bad, and Quality Street, which lost a few $1,000s, which again is bad because you don't want to lose money at all. That's a big problem. But that's just two movies. Bringing Up Baby, which is always described as a failure, well, it broke even. It cost $1.1 million and it made $1.1 million. So again, that's not great, but it's not destroying the studio. Then if you look at the films that made small profits, so again, this is not the kind of thing that a studio wants, but it certainly doesn't actually kill them to have this happen. Here you do get several entries. You've got Christopher Strong, which is the early one that is not well regarded, although of course we think it should be. Then you've got Break of Hearts and A Woman Rebels.
Well, these are all seriously feminist films.
Exactly.
That makes me think, Berman making this investment in Hepburn that Kendall talks about disapprovingly, of her being a kind of prestige property and having to be given important movies and important roles, surely he could not have been expecting all of them to make a lot of money. Surely, again, it was more of a prestige investment than a financial investment for the studio.
I would think so. Now, one thing that I've got on my list is
like Kendall treats it like he was trying to make a lot of money with Hepburn and really going about it the wrong way.
Yeah, that was the thing that I objected to the most in the whole book. And again, I love Elizabeth Kendall's book, but I do feel like she viciously misrepresents Pandro S. Berman, who really deserves to be looked at as an interesting 1930s figure.
And also, it's not like every actress in the 30s had to be democratized. Bette Davis never was, and she was also from New England, and she played heiresses into the late 30s, and this was not a problem.
Well, it's true.
And that was at Warner's.
If I'm looking at it from Kendall's perspective, I do think that Bette Davis, well, she just doesn't really enter into Kendall's world.
Well, maybe she should. If the thesis is that every actress had to be democratized in the 30s.
Bette Davis didn't play proletarians all that much, but nobody thought she was a patrician.
Well, that's absurd considering how she spoke.
True, but they just didn't, and she wasn't, actually. So Hepburn did come off as a real person. She came off as a patrician. That is part of how stars are seen by the audiences, how they come off in real life as well.
It's true, but it's not like everybody had to be Ginger Rogers to be a successful actress in the 30s.
I agree, and I think that the numbers I'm introducing here prove that. So, Mary of Scotland, which I'm not a big fan of, that one also only made a small profit.
Well, John Ford and Katharine Hepburn hated it while they were making it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad movie, but it's not...
Well, they did.
It's one of the ones I'd be least eager to rewatch. Now, I've seen all of them, and that's probably the only one that I don't love, really.
I don't love Sylvia Scarlett.
Well, I love like half of it, let's say. So, big profits. And I've defined big profits as at least doubling the amount of money that it costs to make them. And that's definitely a pretty accepted Hollywood rubric. So, Morning Glory and Bill of Divorcement, those are the really early ones. Both did very well. Oh, they didn't make huge amounts of money. They just didn't cost anything to make. Then you've got Little Women, which was a monster hit. It cost $400,000 to make, and it made $2.1 million. So those are the precursors to 1934. Then right in 1934, the two films we're going to be talking about today, Spitfire cost $200,000 and it made $600,000. And Little Minister cost $600,000 and made $1.1 million. So that's a pretty huge hit, although it's not exactly doubling. It's close to doubling. Then Alice Adams, obviously, and Stage Door. So those are the two that Kendall likes to point out as the outliers in Hepburn's post-Little Women career. But it has plenty of company there in 1934. So I guess if you wanted to really say what's the takeaway from this, it's that her decline from being a major box office star who's generating these profits on her own without any help from someone like a special auteur like George Stevens or a special co-star like Ginger Rogers, it starts after 1934. So that's the main thing I wanted to bring in here. But Kendall definitely says Spitfire and Little Minister. She thinks of those as part of the problem.
I'm not sure if that changes the narrative all that much, because a lot of this idea about depression audiences only wanting to see a certain kind of star in a certain kind of film. I mean, if it's delayed by about a year, I don't think that makes a lot of difference to that narrative.
I think I take issue with that.
Certainly Marlene Dietrich was down the toilet by this year. Like, she didn't profit in this year. This was Scarlet Empress year, I believe. That was not a hit.
No, but what I'm saying is that I do think if you're going to say Hepburn's career encountered difficulties, it encountered difficulties as of Sylvia Scarlett.
Do you think that was just when the public got fed up? It was certainly when Berman got fed up.
I think it's just not a great movie. It doesn't really hang together. It's got some great things in it.
No, we're not talking about is the movie any good. It's about the public getting fed up.
I think that they're linked. I think the public didn't like it because it's not such a great movie. And it's not the kinds of movies she was making. It's that one kind of sucked.
Well, the problem seemed to have been that it was such a labor of love for her and Cary Grant and Cukor that it really was just a self-indulgence problem.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that that's the problem. And then if you look at afterwards, you've got Break of Hearts and A Woman Rebels. They're not big hits, but at least they make their money back. They make a lot more than Sylvia Scarlett did. So people weren't turned off by those to the extent that they didn't show up at all. It's just that they weren't coming to double the budget anymore. The only times that happened, Alice Adams and Stage Door. And then the final chapter in Hepburn's 1930s saga, that I did find accurately reflected in the narrative. It was a final break with RKO over being assigned to Mother Carey's Chickens in 1938. I found the Variety article that actually cites that as the cause. The last thing that I found out was that in that same article, they're talking about everyone's waiting to see how Holiday is going to do, and Columbia is waiting in the wings to snatch Hepburn up with a big contract. But evidently that did not happen. That was the last movie she made before going back to New York to reinvent herself in the Philadelphia story. But there are no figures available for Holiday's budget. everywhere you look says that movie was a financial failure, but it did make $1.2 million, so it had to have cost at least $1.2 million, or else I don't see why anyone would describe it as a failure. I'm not sure how it wound up costing that much. I guess just because of Grant and Hepburn's salaries, maybe?
It's interesting that in 1939, despite the box office poison label, it's weird because the public...
No, she wasn't being considered for Scarlett O'Hara by 1939. That Scarlett search went on for several years. So she was...
No, I recall actually reading somewhere that Selznick, one of the reasons he thought against it was the box office poison label, although that wasn't his only consideration, so he was still considering it.
Yeah, it was all the consideration. The final choice was made in 38, so yes.
Oh, okay. When was the box office poison label applied?
38.
Oh, 38.
Yeah.
All right.
That miserable article.
But back to the segue, which was Mother Carey's Chickens, where she was replaced by Anne Shirley, correct?
Not exactly sure what role Hepburn was going to be playing. There is also a big role for Ruby Keeler in that film.
God, yeah, interchangeable. But Anne Shirley, I kept kind of wishing for the first 20 minutes of Spitfire that role was being played by Anne Shirley. Hepburn is in many ways, and apparently the director agreed with this, really miscast. I think she rises above it, but it's a hard fit.
Well, yeah, sure. It's not an ideal role for her, but I wound up loving the movie anyway. Not as much as Little Minister, but...
Both of these movies lean very heavily on Hepburn's fey quality, which is the one thing she shares with Anne Shirley. And Anne Shirley proved she could play a sort of Ozarkian character in Steamboat Round the Bend very convincingly.
That's true.
But there are things that Hepburn does in this movie that Anne Shirley couldn't do, which become more apparent as it goes on. The movies are kind of similar in their narrative structure.
Yeah, it's almost as if a guiding intelligence was helping to make decisions for developing Hepburn's career, working very closely with Pandro Berman.
Yeah, and then she went off on her own and all hell broke loose. Both movies also, in completely different ways, reminded me of Gone to Earth.
Oh yeah, very much.
The first one was kind of Gone to Earth meets Day of Wrath in an Appalachian setting.
But Little Minister has a lot in common with Gone to Earth.
Yeah, and also a lot different.
Yeah, of course. Quite a different thing in final analysis, but the archetypes, well, without the squire, but the minister archetype and the Hepburn character, although she is kind of leading a double life that Jennifer Jones isn't in Gone to Earth. But yeah, I feel like that's got to have been somewhere in the background.
Sorry, this is skipping ahead because we are going to start with Spitfire, but both movies, everybody's using an accent. The locals are, everybody in Little Minister, and her accent is not very convincing in Spitfire. Pretty good to non-Scottish ears, though not nearly as good as Jennifer Jones's in Gone to Earth in Little Minister. But it's kind of an unusual decision in Hollywood for everybody to have an accent in a film.
That's RKO going for some kind of authenticity there. John Beale's doing a pretty decent accent, I think. Again, I'm not Scottish, so I can't tell, but that's not how he sounds. He's got like a Texan accent.
Well, yes, I mean, the Scottish, of course, always say that every Hollywood movie gets it wrong, but to our ears, it all sounds great.
Yeah, let us know if this is James Doohan level Scottish accent.
Probably. Well, in both of these films, she is more or less considered to be a witch.
Yeah, talking about Spitfire now. John Cromwell directed it.
He has a very extensive Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, he's a great director.
It's not just the Enchanted Cottage, of course, he also established his and Betty
Human
Davis's
Bondage,
and
yeah.
Betty Davis's career.
Same year as this.
Well, Betty Davis also using a very dubious accent.
Yeah.
But still giving an amazing performance, as in fact Hepburn does. And the Wikipedia article does note that although for some reason he was never labeled a woman's picture director, he did get really great performances out of actresses on a consistent basis.
He did.
He also did the movies that established Carole Lombard as a serious actor, Made for Each Other, which is very good but very Selznick, and In Name Only, a little melodrama that I like even better.
Great movie.
But back to Spitfire.
They don't exactly say where this is.
We do have information about the author of the play, Lula Volmer.
Okay, tell us.
She's from North Carolina, Moore County in North Carolina.
Seems like it's set in the Tennessee Valley, right? Because this seems to be work being done by the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was a major New Deal project.
It says here that her first and most successful play depicted the people of the Southern Mountain region. That means nothing to me, but that seems to be probably the same setting.
Yeah, Appalachia. Electrification is coming to this area, and this is something that the FDR government was pushing, creating a lot of jobs, and it was also using national power to bring places into contact with the modern world in a way that they just hadn't been before.
So we get a situation that was immediately familiar to me from Indigenous politics in Canada, a sort of man camp situation, people working in the oil sands and projects being set up in remote areas and problems with encounters between the workers and the women of those populations, such as rape and the institutionalization of sex work.
It's true, although from what we're seeing here, I don't know if this is accurate in any way, but this New Deal project, there are two Northerners who are in charge.
The workers seem to be local. So the problem, she's having a problem with those men,
yeah,
but also with the bosses, the two engineers.
So the bosses are Ralph Bellamy and Robert Young, and we spend a lot of time with them. We get to know what's going on with them.
Robert Young's acting is so outclassed by Katharine Hepburn that it's embarrassing. I love Robert Young, and actually he has a persona in this movie that, in his noir phase, is used brilliantly in They Won't Believe Me. Right?
Yeah,
one of my very favorite noirs. I mean, he's just so great in that, playing an empty, soulless philanderer.
Yeah.
Just like in this movie.
Yeah, he's getting ready for that role, for sure.
Him acting next to Hepburn in this movie is just ridiculous.
I thought it was fine. I mean, he is supposed to be a lightweight.
Bellamy does really well, playing for once a very sympathetic character. I really warmed to him here. He can play such a brutal thug or such a clueless lug.
Well, he did have some romantic leads early on, and I guess this is sort of on the cusp of the period where he's starting to drift into second banana status, although obviously second banana in some great films.
Oh yeah, and in this movie, the list of players at the beginning, the credits, Katharine Hepburn's name is in giant letters at the top.
Yeah, she is the big star. She won the Oscar leading into this year, and people are coming to see the movies for her.
So this movie definitely addressed itself to a shared interest of ours, the religious angle that appeals to Ralph Bellamy. Apparently the playwright was a devoted Episcopalian, but the religion being depicted here is not particularly Episcopalian.
Well, it's not really anything denominational, right? I mean, all we don't see a church ever. We see Katharine Hepburn, who's learned to read because she stole some cards that give a few standard Christian messages to people at Sunday school. And this is basically all she's got to read. So she's read them and read them and read them.
But she treats them as spells.
She does.
The prayers as spells. So it's a very eclectic sort of folk religion. The way it's presented to us is as a form of transcendentalism.
Fair to say. Yeah, rural southern transcendentalism.
Yeah, and she's kind of it's not just Day of Wrath that it recalls, it's also Gertrude, figure of isolation who goes to forge her own spiritual path at the end of the movie.
She says she's turning 18. She has basically raised herself. She does...
Well, she's not 18, though. They established that. She's at least 20.
We don't know what way she's lying, right? Because she says that her mother disappeared about 20 years ago.
That's another
she's
problem.
Turning 18.
It's absolutely unbelievable that Katharine Hepburn is a teenager in this movie. She gives off nothing that suggests that. It's not even her appearance. She just can't act like a teenager.
Well, she's not playing a normal teenager anyway, so it probably doesn't matter. She's a real weird, self-created figure.
I kept wanting to see Anne Shirley. I did. I really did.
Well, she was playing Anne of Green Gables at the very moment that this was being filmed, so...
It's a movie that proves Harold Bloom's thesis in The American Religion, that the American religion is a form of Gnosticism. That's her comment at the end on the baby that's going to live forever because there's a part inside of us that is divine and does not die.
Some really serious stuff happens in this film. We're introduced to her, though. She's defending her property. She's created a path. She's trying to charge a toll on it. And she's not quite hard-hearted enough to actually turn people away, but she's trying to act as if she is.
Well, we also see her interacting with this witless inbred woman.
Yeah, Sarah Hayden, her accomplice in taking in washing.
She's already a pariah.
Now, her dad is supposed to be living there at some points, but we never meet him. He's off over the mountain, maybe doing some work, but obviously he's not sending any money back to his daughter or contributing in any way.
Unlike Jennifer Jones in Gone to earth. She's a sort of fierce virgin who has no interest in the men around her, but a sort of romanticized interest in refined men who are pretty, like Robert Young.
So she's obsessed with Robert Young from the moment that she sees him, not really making a lot of it, although we hear that she's hanging out around the dam all the time, and it starts to become clear that maybe it's because she likes looking at him.
And he definitely likes looking at her.
We find out that he's married. That's all introduced in a really crazy way, right? Like they're talking about the local women.
Well, that's what I was saying. This is
Yeah.
where the man camp feel started coming into it, because Ralph Bellamy was saying that it's a good thing that the local women can shoot because it's their only defense.
Against us. Ralph Bellamy's got troubles of his own. He's coming out of a divorce. He's just too broken to harass anybody. Robert Young, wife at home, but he's definitely willing to take a chance with some of these ladies around their camp, and he says that one of them shot right through his hat. So he got really fresh with somebody at some point.
So I was going to say, Trigger kind of relates to everyone, as we see from her interactions with Etta, too, right at the beginning. She feels that the need to frighten everyone in order to either get them to do what she wants or to not rape her or, various things like that.
She's clearly got to put on a very tough act. Obviously, a very tender-hearted person. We find out as soon as she's alone that she's praying for the health and well-being of everyone in this town, even though they've all kind of shunned her.
But only Katharine Hepburn prays by rolling around sensually like a purring cat while talking to God. It's like her sexiest moments in this film are when she's praying, other than that one scene with Robert Young.
I guess it would feel good to commune with the divine that way.
Well, yeah, she has quite a relationship with the divine. And, she's otherwise completely isolated.
Well, she has her cat,
Yeah.
Zedrak.
Yeah, she has a few little interactions with the cat. But obviously it's her loneliness that ultimately drives her to kidnap this baby.
Loneliness and good instincts. Apparently, baby's rejecting the mother's milk, and the condensed milk actually probably would have been the solution. But nobody listens to her and the baby. Well, we'll talk about that later. Early on, we're told that the workmen and basically everyone in the town and the settlement around the area have discerned that there is a witch amongst them, working some kind of magic,
Well, there's some
preventing people from getting sick, and also even in one extreme case, resurrecting someone.
There's a complicated story about how this woman that got resurrected, they decided she was the witch and then ran her out of town because she was resurrected? Is that what it was? Something like that.
No, it's a pretty Dostoevskian story there, right? We see all of these people gathered around this old woman's deathbed. That's intercut with Hepburn praying for this woman. She says, I never particularly liked her, but she's done some good, healing people with her herbs. And so, yeah, she's some kind of a traditional witch figure herself.
Well, a healer.
Yeah. And then suddenly she comes back to life, and the townspeople, instead of treating this as a wonderment, they treat this as something abhorrent and unnatural, and they run her out of town. This octogenarian hounded until she goes to the next town. Just get out of our sight. You're too disturbing to think about. So that is obviously some kind of parable. Even when incredible things happen, people just have to turn it into something that sucks and makes everyone miserable.
Trigger also jokes about crucifixion at one point. Is this a thing that, I know lynching happened in the South. Was crucifixion a thing that ever happened?
No.
Taking that straight from the Bible.
It's her reading material.
Get out of here before I crucify.
Yeah. There's that storyline. And obviously, we already understand that if there is a witch at all in this movie, it is Hepburn, right? Because we've seen her.
Well, and as in Day of Wrath, she seems to half believe herself that she has these powers. She believes that praying with the right will can make anything possible.
She believes technically that anyone can do that, but nobody else seems to have the force of will that she has.
She does admit to Robert Young, I think she's talking to Robert Young, well, one of them, she does say that she does believe resurrection is possible, but you would have to be very, very skilled in order to accomplish that.
Sure. And really, really believe it. And without any shadow of a doubt, because as soon as any doubt creeps into your mind, then it's just going to fail. Those are the instructions that she provides. And you can pray for anything, it sounds like, although there are things that you really shouldn't pray for, like someone asking you on a date. She thinks that, no, you should be working on making yourself into someone that people want to ask on a date.
So I guess you can ask for,
Brains.
I don't know, self-improvement?
That's what she talks about with Sarah Hayden.
You can't just ask for good things to happen to you.
No, but they have like a Wizard of Oz kind of conversation where it's like, if I only had a brain, Hepburn says, all right, I'll pray for you, but you better pray for yourself too. You make your decisions. You ask the Almighty to help you out, and if it is something worthwhile and you believe it strongly enough, it could very well happen.
Bellamy is attracted by her faith. That's what he and Robert Young decide.
Something that Bellamy clearly wasn't expecting. Coming down here, just sick of everything. His marriage has failed. He's thrown himself into building this dam.
She's
and
very
now...
like another Jennifer Jones character, which is, of course, Song of Bernadette.
Well, that's what I was thinking more than anything else when I was watching Spitfire. That, yeah, this does have a kind of Song of Bernadette feel to it.
Except she gets accused of being a witch rather than a saint. Although, I mean, it's very touch and go for Bernadette herself.
Exactly.
But this woman doesn't have to deal with any Catholic authorities, just a local mob.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure which is better. I would choose to avoid both of those extremes if I could.
So yes, she is just kind of an artist who has developed her own form of religion.
Yeah.
An artist and an individualist, just like young Bernadette, but without having to suffer extraordinary amounts of pain to achieve this.
She's suffered, I'm sure, all kinds of psychological
Well,
pain.
yes, not physical pain.
She's been completely isolated and shunned by her entire society, and even her father sounds like either he's drunk or he's not there.
Sure.
She also is quite a sensualist, however, when she gets the opportunity. She is really into Robert Young. She makes very frank statements about her not particularly caring whether he wants to marry her or not. She says she knows he doesn't want to, and that doesn't bother her. So that's a big deal in 1934.
They have a whole conversation where she it's still a pre-code, right? Where she characterizes herself as trash.
She does.
They have that whole discussion. And so she realizes that no one like him would ever want to marry trash like her. But then he throws it back at her.
Well, he's just trying to continue the conversation. But yes, he uses the term trash as well. And she says, hey, wait a minute.
You don't get to call me that.
No.
It's not the same. But yeah, so she's internalized these class hierarchies anyway. Although no other kind of socialization apparently.
No.
Other than her strong misreading of Christianity.
So they have their romantic idol, which is going to end up in a delicious breakfast that Robert Young is going to make for her. And all of that comes crashing down when Young's wife shows up unexpectedly. It's quite a heart-wrenching scene as Hepburn finally realizes that he's been lying to her the whole time. She didn't mind if he didn't want to marry her, but she does object to the fact that he is already married and pretended he wasn't. That is pretty bad.
And his reaction in this scene is just
gross.
Completely blank. Just no affect.
I think that that's amazing, though. That's one of the best scenes. Just the way he acts as if...
Well, especially considering he's like willing to risk his life for her soon afterwards. But no layers from Robert Young.
Well, no, I think the layer there is that he is hoping that she's going to take his cue and just act like there's nothing going on. I mean, his wife is standing next to him. He can't have any emotion in his voice.
Other actors could find a way to communicate emotions.
Okay.
I don't think Cromwell's interested in his emotions, though.
Well, no, he's a callow fellow. And we do get a little comedy out of it as well, because Hepburn just decides to play it to the hilt and say, oh, is this your sister? No. Is this your mother?
What does she say? Oh, trigger. That's what the wife says.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, she seems to think this is some wild kid. Again, no. Maybe if Anne Shirley played it.
All of that is going on. Well, the townspeople are out to either lynch or, at the very least, ostracize Hepburn for stealing a baby, which we alluded to earlier. She happened upon this household which was not taking good enough care of the baby, according to Trigger, so she just took it.
Because I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it and I wanted it.
We've got some cute little scenes here with Bellamy and Hepburn as they prepare.
Yeah, it suddenly turned into Jerry Lewis and Rockabye Baby or something.
Well, Bachelor Mother. Yeah, it feels a bit like Bachelor Mother for a moment there in the Appalachians.
It was going to turn into one of those raising a baby together love story comedies.
Yeah, and it does, for a few minutes that's what's going on. But then we do know in the background peasants with pitchforks and shotguns looking for Hepburn. So that's a big difference.
So yes, this was a little bit impulsive of her. But yes, this is what I was saying, that her extreme loneliness seemed to, in part, issue in this kidnapping, because she just fell in love with his baby and had to have it.
And she shows up with the baby and the cat, which is great. She's like, take the baby from me. I've got to tie the cat up under your house.
So Hepburn has been playing this role with a lot of her masculine mannerisms, which is fair enough for this character. But obviously, there's more to trigger than that, as shown by her relationship with this baby.
Just her close-up. She drops the tomboy act whenever the camera moves in close and shows her imploring heaven for different things.
She's a very melting and lyrical actress in close-up, it's true.
The narrative is moving towards, it feels like almost inevitable doom. I mean, everyone in this area, except, I guess, fortunately for her, the two people who have the most social capital because they're running the only employment site in the area. They're on her side, but nobody else is. There's real rising resentment of her that could eventuate in her death or some really dire consequences for her anyway. Now, Bellamy especially is trying to run interference for her. He's thinking about the ways that he can mitigate the problem. I mean, he brings the baby back to the parents. And, the way the narrative's constructed, it's very possible that Bellamy wound up killing that baby by giving him or her back to people that were not feeding the baby in a way that was
were they going to do?
I know, but yeah, it's a real tragedy because at the heart of all of this, things are going on. People are learning things about life and learning things about each other. But a baby dies in the middle of all of this, and nothing. I thought the baby might get resurrected or something, but no.
Of course, the story is sort of the opposite of Song of Bernadette in that instead of creating a populist movement with her religion, she is scapegoated for it.
Sure, and that's one way that this kind of thing often goes. I think more often than not, this is how it ends, right?
Well, if there were some sort of authority to rebel against in Song of Bernadette, the way there is in The Little Minister, maybe she could create a populist movement. But since they don't have any visible authority, right, that they need to group themselves against in this wilderness, I don't know, they just sort of turn on each other.
Yeah. I mean, the confrontation scene where they bring the baby, the now dying baby, to Hepburn's shack.
Well, this is the big dramatic payoff scene where I was finally happy that it was Katharine Hepburn playing this role.
Yeah, she's standing up to this entire mob.
And she has an authority about her that few actresses have.
You can see why they might be afraid of her in that situation. I really don't think many actresses could pull this off.
Right. Whole big speech that made me start crying of how she has loved all these people all along, right? Obviously, it's an abstract sort of caritas, Jesus love for mankind rather than any kind of interpersonal relationship that she doesn't have and can't have because they don't really exist in this community. Your only relationships are with your family and with who you marry. And she's not interested in marrying and she doesn't have a family.
She's going on the instructions on one of her cards to love your enemies.
She has no real outlet for this love other than praying, right?
Yeah.
But she also believes, we find out in this scene that she does believe she has these powers. So that is the big Day of Wrath moment.
And there's an amazing scene where, it's mostly these men who are confronting her. And then the mother of the baby comes forward and says, I don't care about any of this. Just save my baby now. We know that you're the witch.
And of course, either way it goes, whether it lives or dies, she's still going to be condemned as a witch. Dies, which is not nice.
Really harrowing scene. I mean, she takes the baby in her arms and you're just really not sure which way it's going to go.
And later she says that it's because
she was worried about herself. She was worried about how it was going to look to these people rather than just focusing on the relationship between herself and God.
But also she was angry at them. She also says that. And also she was angry at Robert Young. So there were a lot of things clouding her antennae here.
It just wasn't going to work. There's way too much interference. So the baby dies. It leads to the potential for her to get completely, killed. They start throwing rocks at her and one of them really bonks her.
Which is a bookend to her nearly killing a guy for kissing her at the beginning of the
people are
film.
Getting pretty dangerous with rocks in this movie. she prays that guy out of harm's way. It turns out that she wasn't nearly so badly injured when Bellamy drives them off. She says she's been playing possum.
She also tells them that she will clear out.
Yeah, which is what they want her to do. They've had enough. Probably the most depressing but also insightful thing that happens in that scene is when, Granny is brought back to accuse her.
Yeah, right? And she does look like one of those old women from Day of Wrath.
Fuck you for bringing me back, making me just trudge across to another town, harassed out of here. Like, I didn't need this. I was dead. I was happy that way, right? It's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something. Why'd you bring me back for this?
Well, life for many of these people appears to be misery.
Exactly. So for this woman, Hepburn selfishly brought her back. So she's been nursing this grudge, and now she gets a chance to pay her back by turning her into the town's big bad. Is she gonna leave, or what's gonna happen? Is there gonna be any kind of resolution with Bellamy? Obviously not with Robert Young. He's got his own marriage to think about.
Long final act, right, which is just the two of them working this out, her and Bellamy. What kind of gets resolved is that he's going to have a Theruvian idyll inspired by her, right, in this house that he's going to buy off of her.
For a quarter. He tries to give her $100, which she says is enough to buy the whole world, and she says, no, I won't sell it to you for more than a quarter. It's not worth it.
But he slips it in her knapsack anyway. And then she's going to hit the road, and she thinks that maybe, just maybe, she will get away from this place and make something of herself. She also talks about something that she needs to find on the road, which is obviously some kind of spiritual quest. Then the movie kind of hedges its bets by making it look like there's a romance on the near horizon for them. But I think that's a falsification. Like, I think they each are getting what they want, a form of transcendentalism, by him taking her place in this home and her going on the road. That kiss is just Hollywood bullshit. Frankly, I'm sure that wasn't in the play. If it's so, then it was Broadway bullshit or whatever, Chicago, wherever these plays were being produced.
Probably. I mean, she was always in love with Robert Young, as misguided as that was. So transferring her affections to Bellamy this quickly, I mean, it certainly could happen. We've seen things like that in real life and narratives before.
I thought you would be more interested in the tension in the film between this portrayal of spiritually oriented American individualism and American mobism. It's a very Emersonian sort of tension.
Yeah, who said I wasn't interested in that?
Oh, you didn't really dig into that conversation so much.
Well, because we've been focusing on Hepburn in isolation. But yes, the social scapegoating that goes on, this doesn't really feel like a Warner Brothers approach to class conflict. I mean, if it was a Warner Brothers film, I think we would be seeing it more from inside the community rather than through the eyes of these two professional class people who are sort of our guides to it.
That's interesting, because they do, because I was thinking about that and I couldn't really get a bead on what made this a particularly RKO film.
RKO is the Elizabeth Warren of the studios, right? Which, again, there's many good things you can say about Elizabeth Warren, and RKO is one of my favorite studios, so I'm not putting them down by saying that. But they're not looking at it from within the...
Well, except that for most of the movie, it's Trigger soliloquizing.
It is.
We're really inside her mind.
Yeah, but she's speaking to us, and we're supposed to be like the people that Bellamy and Young are playing, at least in terms of class and education, right? When she leaves at the end, they actually even mention that she's probably going to be going to get some schooling, maybe go to college or university or something, right? Of course, we're being shown,
which is actually
over and over again, that she is this real diamond in the rough that could really blossom if she gets access to more knowledge.
This is actually what happens in The Little Minister. What has happened. That's true, but I do like the fact that despite that talk and that kiss, they at least do let her go off on her own in the end. So she's going to have to animistically commune with nature to arrive at what she's searching for.
I'm not sure I agree. I don't know if she's going to be communing only with nature or if she's going to school. She's got $100. She could enroll.
Well, I don't know. I really attached a lot of importance to her saying that there was something she was going to have to find on the road. She doesn't know she's going to school at that point.
No, but she mentions it just prior to that. So that may be one of the things that she comes across on the road. Some school where they have books that you can read that go well beyond those cards.
All right. I don't know. I just don't think... I'm glad they don't have some kind of straightforward taming narrative at the end.
Oh, no, it's not about taming.
Well, it is about taming.
I feel like it's more about her...
It's about civilizing.
Well, that, yes. You could definitely say that, and I think that fits right in with the RKO ethos. But they're saying she would become an even more powerful, liberated woman if she could also talk a little bit more about philosophy and literature.
Maybe.
That's what they're saying. I'm not saying that that's true.
I think it's more like she would have more means to protect herself against...
People like Robert Young.
Well, and the mob.
If she could actually read some Emerson and Margaret Fuller, you
Well,
know she'd
no,
like
no,
it.
No, not, I mean, if she could actually become like a businesswoman or something. She could actually have some means of earning a living and some kind of community respectability. But that is a compromise with what we've seen. It's just that she can't, obviously, the system that she's developed isn't going to be able to sustain itself.
No, and I don't feel like the movie is saying that she's actually ever content with this system anyway. It's not like she was existing in some kind of blissful state before all of this broke in on her. She's ornery and annoyed all the time when she has to deal with people. So presumably there's some way she can move on to a state that would be more pleasant.
Well, that's why I find it interesting how Bellamy is sort of appropriating that life in a middle-class way at the end. That's how I read what he does.
It's hard to say exactly what he thinks he's doing.
I read it that way because we have already had that conversation with Robert Young about how that's what appeals to him about her.
Yeah, definitely. She has ignited some questions in his mind that have lain dormant for a long time.
Some questing.
So yeah, they both have something to gain from it, and it does end...
Well, I guess maybe if you're saying you think there's some kind of emphasis on her going to school in the future, maybe they both have something to gain from each other's way of life.
That's how I took it, yeah. They make this love affair an affair to remember date to meet back up at the cottage in 1 year after they've gone through all the changes that they're going to go through.
Is it the Enchanted Cottage?
Could be. So yeah, Spitfire, definitely check it out. Don't let the fact that you can clearly hear that it's Katharine Hepburn's voice under the Appalachian accent ruin the whole thing for you, because you'll get used to it, and it's got a lot to offer. Onward to The Little Minister. So this is a James M. Barrie novel and then play, and you have a lifelong interest in Barrie.
No, I wouldn't say that. Wouldn't go that far. You may be familiar with more Barrie properties than I am.
Only if they got filmed in the 30s.
Obviously, we're all familiar with Peter Pan.
I've never really liked Peter Pan.
Well, that's a common reaction of snobs.
Yeah.
But I think it's wrong, because Barrie turns out to be a very fucked up, complicated, and interesting personality and writer.
Well, I believe that, because I've always loved The Little Minister.
But once you start looking at Peter Pan through that lens, it becomes a hell of a lot more interesting, because it's absolutely the central work of that personality.
Right. Yeah, I've never thought about it at all, really.
Well, maybe you should.
Yeah.
So we're all familiar with that property, which is beloved of many actresses who got to play the stage role.
Jean Arthur.
Which was yeah, exactly. You should be interested in this play. Another variety of fey 1930s studio era actress. That's all I knew. I think when I was around 12 or so, I may have read what may have been. I read a novel based on Peter Pan, and I think it was Barrie himself who wrote it. But that's my only familiarity with Barrie until I heard the story in the Truffaut book of Hitchcock wanting to film Mary Rose. Now, this is something we referred to. We referred to it a few times on the podcast, and
in our very first episode.
First referred to it in our very first episode, where I said that for me, the time travel fantasy narrative that I was most interested in was Mary Rose, and I would probably be endlessly referring to it in our time travel podcast, which never happened because unfortunately it's not a model of time travel that is commonly drawn upon.
No, we didn't find
except for those first two movies, which are some of our favorites. That was Portrait of Jenny and Somewhere in Time. So Hitchcock always wanted to film Mary Rose, didn't think he was capable of it. It probably stands behind some of his more personal narrative like Vertigo. So eventually I got around to reading Mary Rose, and it was indeed a very strange and interesting narrative. Around the same time, I found a long, I think it's New Yorker article on Barrie that talked about the tragedy of his young life that seemed to put him into psychological arrested development, which this is what I'm saying. If you look at Peter Pan through that lens, of it actually representing a sort of crystallization of Victorian attitudes towards childhood that can be seen in a lot of literature from that era, including Henry James, also obviously Lewis Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes more interesting. It's not just a safe little children's story, little sanitized children's story, far from it.
Oh no, I never thought of it as that.
Anyway, so this story of Barry's childhood is that his brother died in an accident when he was 14. His mother had a breakdown, couldn't accept it, and withdrew, started ignoring young Barry, who was like 5 or 6. He apparently tried to get her attention by imitating his brother sometimes, and he just never got over this. It never really felt like, obviously, he had his mother's love, and seemed to kind of arrest in his own development around the age of 6. I looked up his Wikipedia entry and learned more things that I had never known or had forgotten, which is that he seemed to be a very Joseph Cornell type of personality. He was always falling in love with actresses, which, of course, as a playwright, a very successful playwright, he was frequently in contact with. He even married one, but he was, by all accounts, impotent.
Okay.
Eventually, his wife had an affair and then left him. He only grew to be 5 feet 3.5 inches. There's a very precise record of his height. So he was even arrested in stature. Then there was the whole thing that Johnny Depp movie was made about, which is that, well, at the same time as that marriage, he encountered some little boys with their nanny in Kensington Garden and took a, Lewis Carroll, Alice Little type interest in them and started spinning stories for them, including one that became Peter Pan. But his interest in this family of little boys was so pronounced. Their parents both died when they were quite young. So first the father died, and then he became very close friends with the mother and hung out with the family all the time, and then the mother died. She named him as one of the guardians of the children. But that wasn't enough for him, so he falsified her will.
Oh my god.
To make it look like she had also requested that he be one of their primary caregivers.
Did he poison the parents or something? How did they die?
Well, I can't remember if the father was already dead when he met them, but yeah, the mother died a few years later.
Okay.
And, everyone who writes about Barry, famous, well-respected author, says there was no suggestion or evidence at any time that he had sexual contact with these boys. One of them saying that his impotence was a proof of that, as if child molestation requires penetration.
No, you could do some pretty creepy things without, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that one of the children he was closest to later committed suicide doesn't really bode well for the theory that nothing was happening, but that's J.M. Barrie. However, as a writer, all of this becomes very fascinating. Now, we don't get a lot of this in The Little Minister, which is based on a novel by Barrie, other than the fact that the Little Minister himself is, of course,
a small man. And this actually becomes important to the story. And also his very, let's say, unmasculine presentation, don't you think, becomes an important part of the story. The fact that the gender roles are unusual. He's doing both, right? He has this really powerful stentorian approach to preaching, and that's how he gets the job. So he can definitely do the equivalent of machismo from the pulpit. But yes.
What is the equivalent of machismo from the pulpit?
Well, no, he's yelling at people to sit down and shut up and listen to the word of God. I don't know. I think he's being very forceful. They're very, very typically masculine, and that's what they've asked him to do. But it's obviously not what he's really like.
Yeah, and usually that type of patriarch that carries over into his personal relationships with women, but certainly not this guy who is just completely thrown off course by her.
Well, no, because the whole thing, from the beginning, we understand that part of his education was that he's learned that he has to be this way if he wants to assume
especially since
a powerful position.
So little.
Yeah, but that's not his natural inclination. When he is not in his public role, he's totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. I guess we should set the scene a little bit more here if we're going to go into The Little Minister, though. We're in Scotland, rural Scotland. This is not Glasgow or Edinburgh. A town that's big enough to have a couple of churches. We only see the one, but there is another congregation that they shun, or some of the congregants shun. They've called a new minister, and it is John Beale, who arrives with his mother. We meet the townspeople as they wait, and they are hoping that this is going to be someone they can respect, but they're also ready to turn on him if he's not what they ordered, right?
So all the plot description and the Wikipedia entry says is rural 1840s Scotland. So who knows knows if the novel's any more specific than that.
Well, this town is called Thrums. I don't know if that's a real town or not.
Ah.
Did you look that up?
No, I didn't. So yes, because I don't know where we are in Scotland, I don't know if the travellers referred to are supposed to be Indigenous Highland travellers, Romany Lowland travellers, Scottish border, Romanical, I have no idea how to pronounce that, travellers. I don't know which ones we're dealing with here.
But they use this catch-all epithet for them, and they're basically people that have special laws governing where they can be and where they can't be. There are posted bills saying you can't be here, that's the first interaction he has with her. There's a kind of apartheid situation going on here, and they're not really allowed to go in and out of towns.
I know nothing about the history of traveler groups.
I'm just going by this movie.
Groups were ethnically cleansed and then moved to other parts of the world and then were not allowed to settle, or if there was like a combination of the two, I really don't know.
No, and we have no idea exactly what's going on here. We just know that this is a group. They're not part of the community, and they'd better watch out because everybody's on the lookout for them and ready to drive them off or drag them in, as the case may be.
Anyway, I hadn't known that this was before this movie and Gone to Earth and doing research on Adam Ant for an article I'm writing. I had not known that Romani groups were such a part of the UK history. I'll just give my overall take on this movie as we go into it, which is that this is one of the most effective love stories I've ever seen.
It's beautiful.
And I'm not a big sucker for love stories at all. I would say that other than this, we've talked about this before, at least off mic we have, Dave. Portrait of Jenny. Like, there's a very short list of romantic movies that I actually respond to as romantic movies. That might be it.
Well, but now this one.
Those two. Somewhere in Time I kind of respond to as a horror movie.
It's an obsession narrative.
Yeah, so not, but this is a very effective love story. Maybe more effective as such than Portrait of Jenny. Although, of course, I love that movie like few others, but...
Well, it's certainly more provably reciprocal. Portrait of Jenny, it's a little hard to establish exactly what's real and what isn't, what's going on just in Joseph Cotton's mind. So this one, we have two characters who are indisputably real, although one of them is pretty ephemeral for a lot of it, and we're not sure what her ontological status is and what or who she really is.
In terms of a Hepburn performance, this sort of very fey quality that she takes on at the beginning of the movie, where we're more uncertain about her ontological status, and she's supposed to, kind of conjure up this idea of a mystical gypsy. Right?
Well, the way the movie begins...
In those terms, the way Hepburn plays it, and the way she plays around with him initially...
It's like bringing up baby.
It is. It totally looks forward to her performance in Bringing Up Baby, which Howard Hawks claims that he invented whole cloth, but he is always full of crap.
It's all here. Everything that you get in Bringing Up Baby, you get in The Little Minister at the beginning.
The only difference is that he falls for her much quicker than Cary Grant does, or realizes that he has. He's more honest with himself.
Well, he's a much more thoughtful person than Dr. David Huxley.
And you think he's going to be, because of Gone to Earth, I thought he was going to be this hen-pecked mother's boy.
No.
That turns out not to be the case at all.
No, he's totally different from that character. He's just in the same social position as the character in Gone to Earth. But no, he's a much more interesting character.
Played by?
John Beale, a tremendous actor who kept acting for many decades, I believe. You see him here and there, but he rarely got a chance to star in movies. He turns up again in Break of Hearts. I remember him best, actually, from Double Wedding, where he is sort of a second lead, but he's very funny in that, too. It's a Powell Loy movie.
Well, to look at him, you would not think that this would be lead in a really effective romantic movie.
He's incredible. It's a real shame that he didn't get to star in more. Hepburn, again, this is very early in her career. She's fully formed here, certainly, as a very multifaceted performer.
Well, within the general territory of the fey side to her personality, these two movies see her assuming her masculine affectations in Spitfire and her feminine affectations here in The Little Minister. And she's also very beautiful in this movie in a way that anticipates... I mean, they still don't know quite how to do glamour close-ups with her, or aren't trying, but the hair is looking forward to the Philadelphia story for sure.
I think she's very beautiful in this movie. But no, it's not trying to do MGM stuff with her, and I wouldn't want them to. She's kind of a superhero character, right? She's got a double identity.
It kind of vaguely reminded me of Robin Hood at one point.
From fairly early on, we know she's not just the person that John Beale meets in the woods who says she can't read. We find out that she is actually engaged to be married to the lord who rules over this area.
Lord Rintoul.
He is ultimately responsible for all of the oppression of the workers that is going on. He must have an interest in the looms and the mills that they work at, and he's the one that is bringing the power of the state or the army to bear against them at the beginning of this film, and we're told that he's done it before.
So he's not, this would be like, what? There were landlords, but now it's sort of industrialized?
Starting.
So that he's become a business owner?
I'm not sure exactly how accurate that would be. I mean, I'm not...
Well, Barry should know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He was himself Scottish.
Yeah, I presume it is. I presume... Now, of course, aristocrats were getting into... Or sometimes they're not aristocrats originally who bought their way into that title because they were so prosperous from their industrial endeavors, right? I don't really know. We don't know his backstory. We just know that he's titled and also involved in the class conflict directly with the workers.
Well, the last name is in fact Scottish, so he's not English or anything.
Right. She lives at the house and she is engaged to him. We hear about Barbara, his intended.
Babby.
And she goes by Babby when she is running through the woods in her secret identity. And the only clue to the viewer that this is the same person is that we see, as he talks over the plans to subjugate the rebellious weavers with his toady captain of the guard, that guy is played by Reginald Denny, who was a huge star in the silent era and would again be a pretty prominent featured player in many movies of the late 30s and into the 40s, right? Like he's got a very sympathetic role in Rebecca, Frank Crawley. But for some reason in the early mid 30s here, he slips into 20th build roles. And in this movie, he just leads one attack on the village and then gets stuff thrown in his face and then disappears. It's like his agent was really failing him at that point. So they make this plan to invade the town and drag off the ringleaders who had rebelled against the wage cuts and layoffs.
So it's interesting because when the movie starts, all of this is being related to...
Gavin Dishart.
Yeah, okay. Gavin. It's all being relayed to him, and he's just taking this in stride as, oh yes, I hope you do catch those ringleaders. So he has a very conservative or apolitical stance initially.
Well, when he's talking to them, but we do know that his sympathies actually do lie with the underdog. He says so at several points. And his objection to continued riot against the soldiers is that it's just going to get a lot more people killed. That's his perspective on it. And when he does show up at the Lord's castle, all of his arguments are for complete leniency. Just let them go, and that will promote peace. And so every argument he makes, yes, he does have to speak with some kind of respect to this lord because that's the way the society is set up. But he is doing everything he can in his position to make sure that they're treated well.
All right.
He's not some kind of capitalist toady. He just doesn't think it's possible to actually win in that situation. And I think he's right from what we see.
Now, in contrast to this, we get the Gypsy Revolutionary.
We also have the Weary World, the policeman. So he is the town constable.
He says he's the first Polish they've ever had, which I completely misheard.
Well, he says they're calling him Polis.
Yeah,
but it sounds like Polish. Yeah.
Every time he says, I'm the Polish.
Yeah, I'm the Polis. Now, police, the whole concept of policemen was new around 1840, right? I mean, even in London, they were just getting started with having police forces at that time. It was Robert Peel that brought that in. There was no such thing as a policeman. So the idea is at most 200 years old, not exactly something really hallowed by eternity. Maybe we should be giving more credence to the idea of defunding the police.
So this is the 1840s. Wasn't Gangs of New York set in the 1860s?
Yeah.
And there are definitely no police around there.
Well, no, there are some police in New York at that time,
Are
but
there?
they're like
Oh.
a rival gang, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
Which they still are.
then at the end of the movie, the military gets called in
Yeah. So yeah, there had always been
to stop the big riots.
soldiers brought in, mercenary soldiers usually in kingdoms brought in to put down revolts, but nothing like a policeman walking a beat until London in the 1820s, 1830s, and then other cities around the world start to emulate that. And in Scotland in 1840, rural Scotland, Thrums, it's clear that this idea has not really taken hold. And they elect this poor guy to be their constable, but then they ostracize him immediately. So they realize, okay, I guess this is what people have to do now, but we hate this guy. It's a fascinating character because he's this lovable...
Like, you have to have one, but you can mutiny and make fun of them.
He's this lovable guy with a big mustache, just wandering around, trying to figure out something to do with himself, and everyone just ignores him, and even his wife won't even talk to him when he puts on his uniform, he says. And he's just
But
starved.
Barrie really does seem to be having a lot of fun with this idea of contempt for the police.
Yeah, of course. Even the policeman has contempt for his own role. He realizes he's not doing any good, and he confides to Babby that he hopes he's not anywhere around when the soldiers come because technically he's supposed to be on their side, dragging the culprits off to the Huskow for leading a revolt against the established interests, and he doesn't want to do it.
So it's almost like the Western movies, right?
Yeah.
Where there might be a sheriff, but nobody gives a shit.
Except in those, usually
You
the movie's
establish-
angry at the
Yeah,
sheriff.
and you establish the law by the end. And
Yeah, because the sheriff is derelict in his duty for refusing to take Liberty Valance off to the Huskow. In this, no, the movie is like, no, this guy's right. He should just fade into the background and not cause any trouble. That's the best reaction he can have to this situation. So movie is definitely not cheering for him to start taking his role seriously and arresting people. And he never does. He never gets anywhere near doing that. So
yeah, I have no idea what J.M. Barrie's politics were, but they seem very left in this historical novel.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they weren't. It's all about this town that has been devastated by the rise of powered looms and putting all these weavers out of business.
So how does this fit into RKO? We can pause and ask.
Well,
is it again because the perspective, if not the most interesting protagonist, is this little minister?
He is a really interesting protagonist, as is the Hepburn dual character. Both of them are coming from outside of that. So
It's true.
Rob Dow is Alan Hale, and he is inside of it. And
we
he's
saw-
a character with a lot of pathos that we like, but we're not looking at everything through his eyes.
We saw with that early RKO movie that we watched with Joel McRae, right? About the fisheries?
Silver Horde.
Where it was kind of angry at monopolies.
Yeah. It's a good
I mean,
thing to be angry
in terms of depictions of politics, obviously this is a broadly, as we said, left-wing movie, but the impact is lessened by the fact that it's historical. And also the fact that, I mean, how can you not get angry about a lord in a castle? That's a pretty safe thing to get angry about, in terms of representing big power.
Yeah, for sure. No, our sympathies are all with the villagers when they're having their fight with the army that's brought in just to do the bidding of a rich man.
We must regulate the lords and castles.
That would be a good thing to do, but we're not doing it. They're just getting bigger and bigger castles. We don't really know much about her real status in that castle except she's engaged to Lord Rintoul. We see her hand, we see her ring, and that's it. She overhears Reginald Denny and Lord Rintoul plotting, and she runs into town, finds out she has to do some research first. She talks to Weary World about the way the village handles these kinds of incursions by the powers that be. She discovers that they have a special signal, the old mill and the horn. So the policeman gives her all the information she needs for her to stir them up into revolt. She goes to the old mill, the little minister finds her there, and she brings him into it too. So the two authority figures in the village are brought in by her as unwitting accomplices.
So you think she does that just so that if he saw her doing it, he would be able to turn her in, but if he does it himself, he can't do that?
I think she just does it because she's got this impish she just thinks it'd be really funny. I could blow it myself, but it's more funny if I get the little minister to do it. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's
she's really
it.
teasing him very hard for the first while here. Clara Bow in Down to the Sea and Ship.
Trying to get his goat. She knows that he's going to be kicking himself afterwards when he hears that the signal was him blowing the horn.
Which we do see him find out.
Yeah.
Also, that's also after she's made him throw a clod of earth by again pretending to be a weak female at the face of one of the soldiers.
Exactly. The head soldier. He's involved in all of this. He just can't seem to say no to her. Whatever crazy thing she brings in, just like the bringing
mud,
a baby.
Yeah, the mud in the face is kind of like the rock through Boopie's window.
Except that she's the one that throws the rock
That's
in bringing
true.
a baby.
Still, Cary Grant is implicated.
He is. Yeah, John Beale is helpless against her enthusiasm and whimsy. He just goes along and then feels terrible afterwards. Now, ultimately, the rebellion doesn't succeed. The people are arrested, the people that they came to get. But she gives a really rousing speech to the village. So John Beale has pacified them at a certain point, and then she shows up and says, no, let's go down fighting. And she leads the group. So it's not like she is egging them on and then retreating. No, she's right in there, taking her chances with the rest.
It's similar to Spitfire in that she has all of this concern and empathy for this community that treats her like a witch.
They do, yeah.
Or in this case, a Scarlet Woman.
It's interesting because they do follow her lead during that confrontation with the soldiers. But yes, the rest of the time she is persona non grata.
Well, that's after she gets involved with, well, she does and is also perceived to be involved differently with the minister.
So she's not someone you can date. She's someone you could follow into battle. Not someone you could conceivably court.
Yes, or marry.
They think, of course, this has to be some kind of immoral tryst, if anything's going on. So they have no idea what his intentions are.
That would be just as bad if he were going to marry a gypsy.
He would have taken leave of his senses, yes, if he was going to be doing that. We get some very nice vignettes of the minister at home with his mother as well. Beryl Mercer, one of my favorite actresses, supporting actresses of the early 30s. She turns up also in The Miracle Woman as the kindly landlady, Mrs. Higgins.
Right.
She's always so lovable.
So you weren't, well, I guess you've seen this movie before, but I was like, so you were never expecting there to be some kind of bad confrontation between her and Katharine Hepburn?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember what I thought in 1986 when I saw this for the first time, but I've always remembered this movie, and I'd only seen it once because I saw it on TV and was not able to record it as I tried to do when I could at the time. So it's always stuck with me, and when we got this opportunity to watch it again, I was very excited. This is a much better presentation of it than I got on my antenna PBS station coming from upstate New York. So the movie looks beautiful.
Because there is this one moment where she talks about how nice it would be for him to have a Christian wife, and we hear about how it's going to kill his mother if he marries the wrong kind of woman, or gets involved with the wrong kind of woman.
That's what everyone thinks, but no, I think she makes it pretty clear when she talks about that with John that she agrees with him. It's not really just going to be a dutiful church-attending wife that's going to make his life complete, and she wants him to have the best life possible. She really is this sort of archetypal good mother. Like, the film makes it clear the economic basis of his trajectory in life as well, right? His mother had to really work hard and scrimp and save and put everything aside so that he could go to college, divinity school, graduate so that he could get the call to be the minister. And finally, after all of that, they're going to ascend to a middle-class lifestyle. And they've worked together to achieve this. That's all really succinctly conveyed at the beginning of the film. They've been living in a hovel their whole lives until now.
I don't know how, obviously, where or how the screenplay departs from the novel, although the novel summary I found was identical, but it was, just a plot summary. Whereas there was a silent version of the novel that departed more from it in terms of plot. But the whole thing of a story setting up to seem like there was going to be a conflict between mother and son, and then that not materializing is a very Barrie move that appears in Mary Rose.
Right.
So it seems like some of the psychological mechanisms, there were a lot of psychological defense mechanisms at work in his writing. Anyway, so it does build towards that incredibly pathos-laden scene where she disarms all of the authorities by talking about how much she loves her son and bringing out the baby hair.
Yeah.
The baby hair that maybe she had actually kept and would bring, that Barry's mother perhaps had kept of his dead brother that she would bring out and pet. Like, who knows? Same kind of idea, anyway.
It was a pretty common thing to keep a lock of a child's hair.
But was it a common thing to bring it out and show it to all of his business associates, or?
No, she brought it out to show to his
associates?
fiance, right? And then it turns out when she comes down...
I don't feel like that scene is common. I wouldn't call that a common scene.
I think it is something that a sentimental scene between a mother and someone coming into the family. You show people baby pictures, right? That's what we do these days, but I guess...
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is that the way she uses it to paralyze these men.
Well, yeah, but she's not even doing that consciously. She comes down...
Yes, but she does it with the power of her maternal pathos.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a fortuitous accident that she was bringing it down, and she's armed with this lock of hair that totally turns these church elders...
She puts it right in the hand of the head elder, or whatever.
The deacon,
the chief elder, and he's like, I don't want it! It's like it's burning him.
Yeah, because he's trying to do something...
awful.
Brutal, which is bully them all out of town because the minister has stepped outside the bounds of perceived propriety.
Yeah.
Yeah, that scene's incredible. That guy is actually great, the guy playing the chief elder. He goes through a version of what John Beale himself goes through at the beginning, where he's trying to be stern and fails, right?
Yeah, true.
So there's a lot of that.
There's some sort of reproduction there between the very different mother and girlfriend.
But there's just a lot of men trying very hard to play the masculine role and showing us, the audience, and eventually everyone around them, that they just don't have it really in them. That's not what they really are. There are no real hard men in this movie, right? They're all variations of people putting on an act of some sort or other.
That's interesting. The culmination of that is, of course, the scene where they confess their love for each other after all that business with Granny. So let's talk about the scenes with Granny, first of all.
Yeah, those are great, too. So this is a woman... Now, Donald Crisp is an important character in this movie, too, the town doctor.
As he is in Jezebel.
Yeah, he played that role a lot.
Did he?
Either doctor or some other professional man who is a friend of one or both of the protagonists and comments kind of from the outside sympathetically. In The Sisters, he plays Errol Flynn's comrade on the newspaper, and he also is able to sort of navigate between Bette Davis and Errol Flynn. So he's not a member of the congregation. We don't know anything about his religious life, if he has one, but he loves the minister. We're told explicitly that he also loves the minister. He does his best to help the people in the town as a doctor and also as just a professional person trying to help them navigate the system, right?
But on this
occasion... Well, she can't pay her rent anymore on the house that she's been living in. She can't buy food. And yeah, Donald Crisp is going to convince her that her best option is going to the poorhouse.
Does Lord Rintoul own all these houses as well as owning called a mill? The factory? Whatever.
Presumably, if there's a lord and people are renting, they're renting from him.
So even though it's semi-industrialized now, he owns the business and the houses.
It's not explicitly stated, but I would think so, yeah. There doesn't seem to be anybody else who's a landlord in this town, so I would think it's all on his land.
What a mess.
So he brings the minister along, hoping that he can reinforce the message that this is the best option Granny has open to her. It's not a prison. It's going to be a place where she can have some social interaction and actually get food, which she's not getting right now. And you can see his point of view, but obviously Granny is crestfallen that this is what it has come to.
Well, she's very ashamed that she's going to be considered one of the poor.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a little bit like Spitfire.
Yeah, there's stigma attached to this, no matter what kind of spin Donald Crisp is trying to put on it. But you can see his point of view as well. There's not really anything else anyone can do, except Babby shows up and says, well, I'm going to bring £5 and that will take care of anything she needs presumably for a really, really long time. £5 was a lot of money in 1840. And they're like, where are you going to get that? You're just a denizen of the woods. I don't even think people use money out there. She says, look at this ring. I'm going to sell it. They have a lot of questions for her about that, but she refuses to answer. I mean, at that point, definitely we know that's the ring we saw in the Lord's house. So if there was any debate about whether she actually is living this double life, now I think it's over. And we've seen before that even that she can put on this accent or take it off, depending on the situation. She obviously can move between the classes at will.
Right.
There's all kinds of mysterious stuff going on with her. And it's actually even more complicated than we think. Because you start to think, oh, well, this is just some
Robin
aristocrat who is putting on this accent as a lark.
Well, never mind the gypsy persona. Well, not just for a lark. Obviously, she has real sympathies.
Yeah, I know, but she doesn't necessarily need to pretend to talk that way.
Oh, you mean that part of it is the lark? Yeah.
Yeah, it just amuses her to do that, and I guess it helps her to fit in better with what she's posing as.
In a normal romance narrative like this, the obstacle of class between herself and her love interest would be removed by it being revealed that she is in fact high-born, which is what both of the plot summaries, both of the novel and the movie say, that she's really a well-born person, but that's not the case.
No, that's not true. Yeah, when we finally learn about her origin, it turns out she really was a denizen of the forest as a child who was separated from her parents. And she says she likes to think that they did come back for her, but they found out that she'd been adopted by this lord. Now, again, that's just something she's hoping. All of that, that happened so long ago. She has been raised in this castle, so with a lot of privilege, but she doesn't actually belong to it, and she's always been outside of it, and it turns out she was being groomed to be the fiance of the guy that adopted her, which is really creepy in itself.
Yeah, it's like American in Paris.
Sure.
You remember that plot?
Yeah.
That's what happens to Leslie Caron as a I can't remember, child or very young teenager. She's taken in by Gene Kelly's rival.
Sure.
That guy. And then she feels obligated, basically.
Yeah,
right?
no.
And that's the central conflict between the lovers.
You certainly see this a lot in old-time narratives where men take in young girls and then expect them to grow into a late-life helpmate.
Well, this was a wartime narrative, American in Paris, right? And we actually see that plot in the Chantal Akerman shopping mall musical.
That's true.
Golden 80s.
Yeah.
Where she rejects that as an ideal love.
It is not ideal.
Well, I mean, most commonly it is rejected.
The good thing about all of this is that, yeah, she's privy to all kinds of information that would otherwise escape the townsfolk, and they would be left flat-footed by the machinations of the Lord. So she has this insider status that she uses to her benefit and to the benefit of the people she cares about out there. Again, people who don't seem to love her, but she loves them.
Anyway, so the big, crazy love declaration scene between them occurs after they start regularly meeting because of helping out Granny, which she stipulates, so she's flirting with him. Then they just have that crazy, ecstatic moment where she's going on and on about the kind of man that would be ideal, which is like a patriarchal ideal that she's talking about.
Well, it's true.
It suddenly turns into the quiet man, and she's talking about how he will even beat her into submission when she's not talking good sense, and things like that. And he keeps ecstatically exclaiming, "I am that man! I am that man!" And it's just so ridiculous because he's so clearly not. And then they kind of look at each other because they've kind of mutually climaxed by talking about this stuff, and then they run away in separate directions.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's true. That's not the kind of guy he is. That's not the kind of relationship that they're going to have.
But it's kind of like they've had verbal sex.
Yeah.
By talking about it.
Mildly S&M verbal sex. She says that because she's not a man, she wants to be with the kind of man that she's always grown up thinking men should be, right? But at first, yeah,
the kind that she has sort of been acting as in the movie up to that point.
Right, and the kind of man that Lord Rintoul is not.
Right.
Because she has no respect for him.
The kind of man that I would want to be with must always sympathize with the weak even when the strong are right.
Exactly. And he says, I am that man. Definitely. And that, I think, is true.
The other plot that's brewing, and that's very interesting, is Alan Hale, who has been basically straightened out initially by the minister because the minister's, his power is not in his exertion of patriarchal authority, like on an individual level. The power he has over his parishioners is that he is an example of moral rectitude.
Yes.
And so he shames them into straightening out. And this has worked well for Alan Hale because he has a small child. Oh, this child actor was so familiar.
I know I've seen him before, yeah. The kid's name is Micah. I don't know the actor's name.
And he's doing another amazing Scottish accent.
Yeah.
It's actually been a benefit to him that the minister has exerted this power over his father, and the father has dogged, dog-like love for the minister because of this. Right?
Yeah, well, because Alan Hale's problem, it's not stated exactly, but it seems clear in the performance that he's turned to drink because he has lost any faith in the people in his town. He feels like there is no example of goodness, and he's just fallen into the idea that everyone's a hypocrite. When the little minister proves that this person who is supposed to be a moral guardian and guide and a person that everyone can turn to really is that person, it does really have an effect on him, and he turns away from the bottle. And we see that he has been a really kind of mildly, at least, terrifying drunk. When he starts drinking, Micah leaves the house with his rabbits.
Well, because he says his father is arguing with the devil.
Exactly. It's scary.
So that's like Jack Nance. Everyone says that that's what Jack Nance was like when he was drunk, which was constantly. He was basically just arguing with the devil.
Yeah. And Alan Hale is a giant, hulking guy, as they actually describe him in this film. You really want to get out of his way if he's arguing with the devil. But the little minister strides right in there in the midst of that conversation, that supernatural conversation Alan Hale is having, and something happens in there that changes everything. We don't actually see it.
No, of course
It's
not.
better to have it be an ellipsis.
But Hale is very conflicted about this because even though the minister has disappointed him, he still loves him.
Well, yeah, exactly. But he is tormented by this idea of hypocrisy, right? And when he starts to feel that the minister himself is also a hypocrite, it's just tearing him apart. He doesn't want anyone else to find it out.
So he's kind of sort of a Dostoevskian fairy tale character.
Yeah, he is. So he does everything he can to protect the little minister, which causes even more problems because he's just not good at keeping secrets. His impulsiveness becomes a plot driver at several points, especially at the end of the film.
So the charm of this relationship, other than Katharine Hepburn just being very charming, is how persuasively John Beale falls in love with her and nothing else matters to him at an early point.
But he doesn't see it as a conflict. He might have at the very first, but when he starts to realize how good she is...
Yeah, but before that, he actually helps turn the parishioners against their relationship by irritably exploding when she writes messages in his Bible.
Well, you know,
in that hilarious scene.
It's so good. It's one of the funniest church scenes you're ever going to see. Right up there with the stuff in Holiday with Lou Ayres and the collection plate. He's going to preach a sermon from the book of Ezra, and we get a lot of fun business with all the parishioners trying to find Ezra in the book, ruffling through.
Noisy page turning.
And then when he actually gets to the page, the minister himself, there's a note, a sassy note from Babby.
Asking him why he's so perturbed by her, basically.
Yeah. Why did you do all these things? What's going on with you? ? Yeah, then he preaches a misogynist sermon. Taken from the book of Genesis. But immediately feels...
They really take it to heart.
Yeah, they take it to heart. He tells his mother, I wish you'd stop talking about that. He obviously regrets giving that sermon, but he did it in haste.
She went a step too far there.
His attitude towards her becomes completely changed and wholehearted when he sees her genuine desire to help Granny.
Yeah.
That's when you see it on his face. That, okay, there's no conflict anymore. This is a good woman. Yes, she is a weirdo that nobody will accept in the town, but I'm not troubled by her
And he
anymore.
can't even figure out, he doesn't actually believe she's a gypsy, but he can't figure out who or what she is.
Right. And he doesn't care anymore. He just knows that she's good, and he's gonna find out and
she's
marry
sexy.
her. Yeah, well, that too. That helps.
Everyone talks about how bonny she is.
She really is. He gets so distracted in the big final suite of scenes. He shows up at Granny's. Hepburn has decided that for the good of the town and for the good of the minister, she is just going to disappear.
And that little boy in particular.
Exactly. That's a big scene.
That's the turning point.
She finds out Alan Hale's been destroyed again. The whole town, they're going to fire the minister. They're all losing their trust in him because they know he has been getting up to these shenanigans with this
reputable woman.
Woman X. And she just decides, okay, I'm going to disappear into this marriage that I'm already trapped in anyway. I'll just never show up again in my babby identity. And actually, she means to stick to it. The only thing that stops that from happening is Granny decides that it would be terrible for these two who are so in love not to have each other when they're older. And again, we get a lot of pathos out of this woman reflecting on what her life is like now, just sitting alone in that place.
It's just not natural for one to be alone at this age.
So
I hope we are not alone at that age.
I hope so too. She engineers their meeting, and then of course they can't keep from confessing their love to each other once again, and the minister completely forgets that he is supposed to lead a meeting.
Prayer meeting.
Yeah, at the church, at the kirk. This is actual dereliction of duty, which you could understand people would be angry at him for.
But that's not why they're angry.
No, exactly. But they're using it as a pretext. He has completely abandoned his post and we can fire him now. That's the debate going on. He doesn't show up. I mean, he really forgot completely, and he's doing all kinds of other things with Babby, trying to figure out how they're going to break the news to Mother and to the town that he wants to marry her.
And so the whole drama when those officials turn up at his door, as they do in Gone to Earth.
But it goes so differently.
It goes so differently because of J.M. Barrie's weird maternal feelings. Because the whole drama of this scene is just, it's not about the mob hurting Katharine Hepburn in this case, but about these officials upsetting this mother, disappointing her and her son.
The stakes for Katharine Hepburn there are stakes there, but they're very different, right? She's not in any danger from these people. She's so far above them socially that they can't hurt her physically.
No, they can only disappoint this old mother.
Yeah, exactly.
Make her feel bad about her son.
We're not worried about Katharine Hepburn. We're a little worried she's going to have to marry this gross old guy and not be with the man she loves, but she's not in any existential danger.
No.
It is the mother that is in real potential trouble here. Just her natural affability and love for her son drowns out anything that these guys are trying to do. Meanwhile, at the church, the confrontation goes on because the mother's not there, and they have fired him, and he's not supposed to be allowed back in. They're going to call another minister. That's the way it goes. Rob Dow, loyal to the end, insists that the minister must be allowed to go back into the church and explain himself, and when that's taking a bit too long for people to acknowledge this truth, he lunges at the guy at the door with a knife, and the little minister proves once again his enduring goodness by throwing himself in the path of the knife.
I was actually very worried that he was going to die.
Sure, could easily have happened, right? I mean, this narrative could have ended that way.
I was so worried and so prepared to be sad.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a bad way when they drag him back. And he gives...
But then I remembered about the doctor, that he's a character.
Sure, but the doctor could fail to save him.
I guess.
But he doesn't.
Do get a scene that is sort of like our love transcends death.
Plus, he makes a public declaration of his, the depth of his feeling for this woman that the elders can't help but be affected by. And then the coup de grace is delivered when they see her praying at the door and the release of all of her emotions as she hopes that the minister will recover. They can no longer think of her as a Scarlet Woman.
Up until that point, she has seemed very flippant about religion, but I guess that was just part of her teasing.
Probably.
She was flippant about the role of minister anyway.
But no, it doesn't mean that she has no faith or connection to eternal divine things, as we see here.
But that's a pretty erotic scene, actually, the way it's filmed with her mouth against the door.
It is very moving, and
I don't know much about this director. This is a very dedicated, like I said, just the fact of everyone being in an accent, that being so atypical.
well, I think that part, for sure, Pandro Berman was behind a lot of that. Richard Wallace has directed many really good films. I don't know if I can...
Do you want me to look up the filmography?
I know he was a silent comedy director, but other movies that he's directed that I really loved are The Fallen Sparrow, which is a World War II era spy movie with Garfield. It's incredible, that movie.
I forgot to look him up. Hold on, I'll do that.
And The Young in Heart is a great con artist comedy from the late 30s.
So yeah, he seems to be mainly remembered for this movie and A Night to Remember.
But many fine films in his oeuvre. Just a lot of different types of movies, so it's very hard to say exactly what he might have had to say as an auteur, if he was an auteur, but he was certainly a very fine technician.
Well, sure. I mean, the movie is full of ideas.
Beautifully shot.
Directorial ideas.
Great acting. Very emotional experience, and hilarious at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, definitely.
it really has everything you want in a movie.
So by the time he is nearly expiring in her arms, I am so sold on this relationship.
Yeah.
I was
And
like dissolving in tears.
the doctor pulls him through, and we get a nice little coda with Weary World looking in on them and doing some bits of business with a hat.
Oh yes, comic policeman coda.
Yep. Everything's gonna be great in this town. Hopefully
We'll
we'll find some other
continue-
industry.
We'll continue to abuse our policemen. Oh right, and she gets her little final scene with Lord Rintoul.
The movie is so good-natured that it doesn't even have the heart to demonize Lord Rintoul. He winds
Well,
up...
not personally.
Exactly. No, I mean, he's no longer in the picture romantically.
Well,
he just goes
I
back
mean,
to his castle.
They demonize what he's doing to the town.
It's true. But they're not interested in having a melodramatic villain still lurking at the end of this, because it's so
Well,
overwhelmed by the power of the
I don't know,
romantic union.
I think she dismisses him in a way that's more cutting, almost, than it would be to overtly demonize him, which is by saying that he has no idea what love is.
Sure. Not part of humanity.
No, he's just sitting there playing games with his pinched-faced sister.
Yeah, that's what the aristocracy is.
He says, buy you anything in the world. Isn't that love?
No.
No, she says.
It's waiting for me on that couch.
Which really should be completely banal, but somehow it has the whole force of the movie's emotion behind it.
It has a real intensity. I mean, just watching this again, it brought me back to being 12. I was so emotionally involved in the movie then, and I was again this time.
Pretty rare in Katharine. I mean, I was saying in general, I'm not a big fan of romance movies, but it's pretty rare in Katharine Hepburn's oeuvre that she persuasively falls in love, like mutually in love with somebody. That happens in Woman of the Year, but it's such a destructive relationship that it's like you just like feel disgusted by the end.
I think this is right up there with Holiday in terms of great romances that she's involved in.
Holiday.
Like that one too, you're very invested in making sure that she winds up with Cary Grant.
Very true. But also I was thinking of, I actually am very invested in her relationship with Jimmy Stewart in Philadelphia Story. Oh, the only thing that makes me not want it to proceed is, of course, Liz.
Sure.
Not wanting Liz to get hurt.
What about poor Liz?
Exactly. But the two of them together, or him and Cary Grant. As I've said, anyone who has a relationship with Jimmy Stewart in that movie, it's great. Any other relationships in the movie are awful.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart is the heart of that movie, for sure.
Even though he's like a louse.
He is.
A louse with a wandering eye.
Yeah. So there you have it. Katharine Hepburn, 1934. RKO, 1934. A great year at that studio, I think. And Hepburn, if you were watching at that time, I don't believe you would have predicted that her career was going to take a nosedive right after this.
Well, Katharine Hepburn is really, there are so many more qualities, of which we've named a few, being masculinity, feyness, feminine wiles. There was so much more to her than just playing a snob or some kind of miraculous career woman.
Absolutely. And I think Pandro Berman was trying out all of the variations here with her. I mean, they were working on this together and doing great things.
Yeah, these were real stretches, obviously, from her first few roles.
I think Jo March, you could see the progression from Jo March to these characters. She's not any kind of a patrician either, right? I mean, she is a New Englander, so that's more related to Hepburn's background, but...
Well, I mean, from the time of Christopher Strong, I mean, that already is a very feminist movie, and it's a movie that portrays her as a weirdo.
Yeah.
Like, you can go anywhere from that.
Yeah, exactly, and they did. You know, even Sylvia Scarlett, even though I don't think it worked out, I do think it was worth trying, that movie. It just kind of got off track in the second half.
I mean, you can see from the sort of sense of isolation that she talks about and difficulty of having relationship in Christopher Strong. I mean, you can obviously see the relationship between that and Spitfire.
Yep.
But there's nothing else in common between them.
No, we're going to do other Hepburn movies as we go through RKO because I really think it's important, and I love Break of Hearts and A Woman Rebels as well, even though those ones are always described as total failures that did Hepburn no good, and I don't agree with that, so we'll see how we discuss those in the future. But more imminent in the future is next week, and that is 2020 Christmas Special.
Oh, wow. This is your pick.
So we're going to be raising a glass of chiaroscuro cheer next week as we do a noir Noel. We're going to be talking about The Lady in the Lake.
Did you, write that down before you said it? Did you, map out that you were going to say that?
I thought of it. So we're going to be talking about Lady in the Lake by Robert Montgomery, starring Robert Montgomery, although mostly he's not on camera. The very, very first classic film I ever saw, and a very interesting translation of a Chandler book into a Christmas time noir setting. And then we're going to be talking about the 1988 remake of DOA, starring Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan.
I didn't ever see that, did I?
I saw it twice in the theater, but it was really, really hated at the time. And I think it still is. I don't know if there are any champions of this movie.
You liked it. You are a champion.
I loved it at the time. I haven't really watched it in a very long time, so we'll see if I still like it. But anyway, that's going to be our Christmas gift to you. I hope you'll join us on the 25th of December.
It's a real odd one, Dave.
Good night.